Today we're going to be showing you how to remove the carburetor on a 2009 CRF250X. These bikes and the 250Rs, the carburetors are pretty hard to get to, and a lot of people have trouble trying to figure out how to pull them out. I'm just going to show you how to remove it, how to put it back. Go ahead and start by removing all the plastics, 8mm on most of these plastic bolts, and then usually a 10 or a 12 on the seat bolt, depending on who's worked on it last. We're going to remove the tank, disconnect the fuel line at the petcock and leave it connected to the tank, and remove the entire tank with the fuel filter in the tank as well. Next, we're going to take the back half of the bike off, disconnecting the frame bolts and pulling the airbox with it, keeping it all assembled in one piece. These frame bolts are a 12mm. They're pretty tight. They're usually put on with Loctite, so it will take some oomph to get them off. A lot of people have trouble with this airbox right here. There's a screw down here. Really getting it off isn't the hard part, it's getting it back on. It's not that difficult. If you watch near the end of the video, we'll be putting it back on. But there are three things you need to remove. One is that lower screw for where the airbox actually hooks up to the carburetor. Two is this vent line up here with this breather. And then there's a third one right up in here as well, right down there. And those both need to be released so that we can pop the box off. Remove the top of the suspension bolt, that spring. Usually you're gonna have to lift up on the tire to get it to pull tension off of that bolt. And then you can slide the bolt out this side over here. You can see me lift the tire up. Then we're gonna pull the whole back half of the bike off. There's lots of battery cables and cooling lines and things like that that are running through there, so be gentle with it and just hang it over to the side of the bike just like that. Then we're going to remove this suspension right here. You don't have to take that out. You can just actually slide the carb out through here if you want, but it sure makes it a lot easier. The bolt down on the bottom below the spring lets you pull the entire spring off and out. Next, loosen the little screw that holds the boot to the carb on the front half. We're going to pull the carb out through the back half of the bike, unscrew the little black cap that covers the throttle linkage right there, and then disconnect the linkage coming through here. And when we put it back together, you're going to want to make sure there's appropriate slack. But remove this this piece right here is plastic. It's for the decompression lever, or basically a hot start. I find that it's easiest to remove it up at the top and slide the entire cable down and through. If you try to remove it from the bottom, you can. It's just so many of these bikes have been stripped out, and removing it from the bottom, you'll usually damage the threads, or you'll find that somebody else has already damaged the threads. If you just pull it from the top like this, the entire thing will come out. You just slide the entire cable through and leave it connected to the carb, leaving those threads as virgin as possible. Don't forget to disconnect the electrical from the carb right here. And then you can just remove the carburetor out the back half of the bike, pop it off the boot, slide it out, make sure everything's disconnected before you start ripping away, and then make sure that you are sliding your decompression or your hot start cable through as well. Now that the carburetor is out of the bike, you can do what you need to with it. You can rebuild it, replace it, or whatever. These are pretty expensive carburetors, so generally you're going to want to rebuild it. They're fairly durable and not too complicated now that it's out of the bike. Couple things, you can see the swivel on that hot start you can remove, and linkage on this side. We can go ahead and put the carburetor back in now. Remember that hot start line, you just feed that up the direction that it came out. We're going to pop the carburetor into that boot that's coming off the cylinder head. It only fits one way, so make sure it clicks in and the little notch fits over the aluminum notch on the carburetor. You can tighten that down now, and then we'll go to the other side and hook up some linkage. All right, let's do one last look at everything. Throttle cables are coming in. Remember that wiring harness that connects up right there? You have these breather lines that come up and plug in on the top right here. They actually go through the frame. You have this breather that comes up through here, another breather underneath it. All right, so plugging this airbox onto the carb, a lot of people have trouble with it, especially with these little breathers.
one of the tricks is to leave this rear suspension out from here and out of the way for now, so we can.
Then we're gonna put a hinge point in by using the frame bolts, one on each side. And so just a little loose, so you can rock the frame back and forth. Then you're gonna, because the suspension has not been hooked up yet, you'll hook up those breather tubes to the airbox. There should be 2 of them, depending on the ear model. Sometimes there's only 1. And then you'll rock it into place and use the boot from the airbox that has a tab on the bottom of the boot. You'll pull on that tab to get it around the carburetor throat, and then go to the other side and use a long flathead screwdriver, pushing it through the frame, through the exhaust, then working back and forth on both sides, just pushing on that until you get the airbox in place, and then put that final bolt in place to square up the frame. Next, you're going to use a little screwdriver and use your foot on that rear tire to lift it up and down, to wiggle the suspension up into place so you can drop the top of the suspension bolt through there. There's going to be some wiring you have to move out of the way, but basically wiggle back and forth. Don't forget to lift that tire back and forth. That's the key, until it drops into place, and you can drop the bolt through and then put that nut on the other side. That should be pretty tight, tightened all the way down because it's a suspension piece. Coming over to this other side, we'll hook up our fuel lines. They don't even have to be bolted up. We just need them connected to get fuel to the carb. These bikes, 3 pumps on the throttle, and then it should just start right up. I actually forgot to turn my choke on, and that's why it took a minute to start. Once the choke's pulled, you can hear it idle. We'll put our fuel tank back on with that fuel tank bolt, and then pretty much everything else is simple. Put our plastics on, our seat on, our frame bolts need to be tightened back up the rest of the way. Those should be pretty tight, but the plastic bolts don't need to be that tight. I hate pulling plastic bolts off that somebody tightened on too tight. And that's pretty much it. Make sure your petcock's bolted up on the other side, and that's it.
So this bike is